Today is actually a very special day because I get to introduce our speaker this morning, Kent Butcher. And so I want to talk a little bit about Kent Butcher. Now, many of you have seen Kent probably and know him as the guy who plays keys or the guy who plays bass or guitar on our stage from time to time. But when I look up here and I see Kent Butcher playing guitar, playing keys, I see so much more than that. You see, 17 years ago, Jenica and I were first married, and Kent was our pastor. And he and his wife spoke into Jenica and I's life, and sowed every ounce of marriage advice they could into a little marriage small group. Do you remember this, Kent? It was called Marriage Maintenance. And Kent's probably like, wow, that was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. It was like 17 years ago or more. But then, about 12 years ago, Kent was the one that I called on the phone and Jenica and I spoke to when we felt like God was stirring this whole church planting thing in our hearts. He was the one I called. And I said, Kent, I don't know what to do with this. And you know what he told me? He said, well, that's funny you should say that. I think you should move to Goshen and you should plant a church in Goshen and we'll be your sending church. That was Kent Butcher. Kent was the one who said, come, we'll partner with you as you plant the Vine Church. So many of you don't know this, but Kent was our sending pastor and was in fact the reason that this church got started and got off the ground. Because Kent risked with us. This church wouldn't come to fruition if he hadn't done that. And it was Kent that showed up at our first church service all those years ago, almost 10 years ago. And he sat kind of in the back, and he just cheered us on. And it was a terrible sermon that I preached. It was like my first sermon ever. But he was like, afterwards, it's okay, buddy. You'll do better, right? He was encouraging. Kent was the one that met with me every other week for 6 years, over 6 years. Pouring into my life and into Jenica's life, and in my life specifically, pouring anything he could to help me be a better father, a better husband, and a better pastor. You see, Kent was the pastor of Syracuse Vineyard for many, many years. He was our area leader in the northern Indiana and Michigan area for the Vineyard. He carried some leadership roles in the Russia Missions Partnership, and he has carried so many other roles that it's not even funny. Kent is a leader among leaders. Kent is a pastor of pastors, and he is somebody that is very, very, very near and dear to Jenica and I's heart. You see, when I see Kent on stage playing keys, what I see is somebody in great humility serving God's kingdom in whatever way he possibly can. Kent has quite literally given his blood, his sweat, his tears, and every fiber of his being to the kingdom of God. He's given his life to this thing. And so I would encourage you to listen to what he has to say because it's going to be good. Will you guys welcome my mentor, my pastor, and my dear friend, Kent Butcher.
Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't expecting this. Travis, Jenica, I am so proud of you guys. And I'm proud of you, Vine Church. God's hand was in this all along, and there are people in Elkhart County who are not going to go to hell. People in Elkhart County who are going to spend their lifetime with Jesus and eternity with Jesus because you guys have done what you're doing. And so good on you. Well done, Vine Church of Goshen. I really wasn't planning on starting off with this, but I just feel like God has put it on my heart to tell you this story that I first of all want to introduce Elizabeth. If I could have Elizabeth stand up, I'm going to embarrass her. So Elizabeth, most of you don't know my story, is my fiance. We are going to get married in about 3 weeks. Woohoo! And that's confusing. Well, Travis just said, you're in a marriage group that my wife and I led. Elizabeth is a widow, and I am a widower. We both lost our spouses about the same time, about a year and a half ago, something like that. Her husband and her and my wife and I knew each other going way back to Purdue University in the Ice Age a little while ago. But we reconnected through our journeys of grief. We commiserated with one another, texting back and forth, and commiseration became curiosity, and curiosity became two 60-year-olds figuring out what it's like to go on a date. It's weird at 60. It is, and the first date is now, sometime later, a wedding date. And so I'm excited about that and excited to introduce her. But the reason I felt it was important to share that, my wife had contracted a very rare disease that took her over a long period of time. And I'd served the Lord in ministry for 35 years. I stepped down from full-time ministry to take care of her. And honestly, even though the Lord was near to me through the whole time, he was my best friend, it was hard, and I didn't understand his ways. And I threw a lot of punches at him. It's just like, because I just felt like he was just shredding my life. And my life just felt like tatters and rags. And I didn't understand it at all. And I had no idea what he was doing in Elizabeth and what he was doing in each of our lives. And now there's this beautiful tapestry that's being sewn together from the tatters of life. And I feel there's somebody who needed to hear that, because right now you feel like you're hopeless, that it just tatters and shreds in your life right now. And you just can't see how God can pull the pieces back together again. And he can. And I want to tell you, he did it for me. He did it for Elizabeth. And he will do it for you. And so don't give up on him. And I tell you, he is not going to give up on you. Okay? So if that's for you, I'd even encourage you, after the message, there's going to be a time to receive prayer. Let the ministry team pray over you and just speak that sense of hope into your life. All right, that's all freebie. That's not even what we're talking about here this morning. So some of you will remember a social media craze that some years ago swept across the planet, unfortunately, like a swarm of locusts. And it was the "What is your real name?" questionnaires. Anybody remember those? You know, you'd answer a couple questions. No, none of you are old enough. After answering a few questions, you would be told your real name, like your real Disney princess name or your real zombie character name. I didn't know there was a difference between the two, but apparently there is. Or you'd be told your real superhero name or your real supervillain name. And so I took that last test, and oddly enough, my real supervillain name was Stay Puft the Marshmallow Man. I don't even know what that means, but it doesn't seem like a supervillain to me. Well, anyway, I think the idea behind these questionnaires was this, that the name that gets slapped on us says something about how we fundamentally see ourselves. The name that gets slapped on us has something to do with how we fundamentally see ourselves. And in this message that the Lord put on my heart for this morning, in our passage in Luke 8, we're going to see Jesus administrate one of these "What is your real name?" questionnaires. And Jesus' questionnaire provides us with an opportunity to take a look in a mirror and see if there are some names that have been slapped on how we see ourselves. And so I'm going to pick up in Luke 8, verse 26. And this is what I like to do things. Let's read this out loud together. Out loud together. All right. So they arrived in the region of the Gerasenes across the lake from Galilee. As Jesus was climbing out of the boat, a man who was possessed by demons came out to meet him. For a long time, he had been homeless and naked, living in a cemetery outside the town. Next slide, we'll keep going. As soon as he saw Jesus, he shrieked and he fell down in front of him, and then he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Please, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already commanded the evil spirit to come out of him, and the spirit had often taken control of the man. And even when he was placed under guard and put in chains and shackles, he simply broke them and rushed out into the wilderness, completely under the demon's power. And Jesus demanded, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, for he was filled with many demons. So there we have it. Jesus, what is your real name? Questionnaire. Now think about this for a second. If we pause to ask the question, who was Jesus talking to when he asked, "Who is your name?" Was he talking to the man, or was he talking to the legion of demons in the man? Well, the legion. So listen to this. If we dig down into the grammar of the original language here, we'll discover that Jesus addressed his question to the man. To the man. He says, "What is your name?" Say your, masculine singular for all you grammar nerds. Masculine singular. And so when we understand then that Jesus addressed his question to the man, we understand the significance of the man's response. Legion. That's who I am. That's my name, Legion. So here's the punchline, and don't miss this. So when Jesus asked the man, "Who are you?" the man's answer to Jesus' question was defined by who dark voices told him he was. The man had learned to identify his fundamental identity in agreement with the name that dark voices had slapped on him. I am Legion. That's my name. So the man's fundamental identity was a dark-voiced name. And this is where this passage then connects to you and me. That many of us, like this man of the tombs, live lives that are driven by dark-voiced names, by dark-voiced lies about who we fundamentally are. And I know from 35 years of pastoral experience that when pressed for gut-level answers to the question, "Who are you?" Really, who are you? That the kinds of answers that bubble up from deep down inside of us often sound something like this. I'm worthless. That's who I am. I'm stupid. That's who I am. I'm lazy. That's who I am. I'm good for nothing. That's who I am. I know that many of us live lives that are driven by those kinds of dark voice names that got slapped on us. And so here's what I want to do right now. I want to pause for a moment for each of us, just kind of in our own sacred space right now, to ask the Lord to show us if there are any dark-voiced names that got slapped on the core of our being. And so I want you to ask the Lord just right now to show you your honest answer to the question, Lord, what are the lies I believe about who I really am? So I'm just going to leave you about 30 seconds or so of space. Just ask that question of the Lord. So here are some of the dark-voiced identities that I felt the Lord showed me would be in this room this morning. So consider if any of these fit. I'm ugly. I'm unlovable. I'm unlikable. I'm invisible. I'm unnoticeable. I'm a failure. I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm a disappointment. I'm not good enough. I'm a poor excuse for a man. I'm a poor excuse for a woman. I'm a terrible mother. I'm cheap trash. I'm a slut. I'm unwanted. I'm a mistake. I'm defective. I'm crazy. I don't belong. My family would be better off without me. I'd be better off dead. So take note if any of those feel like, that is exactly what is written. All right, so if it does sound familiar, let me ask this question. Who told you that's who you are? Who told you that? It was a dark voice. It was a dark voice. Now you might object. Wait, Kent, it sounds like you're saying this dark voice was a demon, but it was my dad who said I'm worthless. It was my mom who said I'm fat. It was a sibling who told me I'm stupid. It was my best friend. It was a teacher. It was a coach. It was my ex. It was myself. But it was a person who told me that's who I am, Kent, not a demon. Fair enough, I understand. But listen carefully to what I'm about to say because you'll misunderstand this message if you misunderstand this. Am I saying that our dark voices come from a demon? Well, not necessarily. I'm just saying it doesn't come from Jesus. It doesn't come from Jesus. It wasn't Jesus who said this hideous name is who you are. It was a dark voice that told you that. It was maybe another person's dark voice. It was maybe your own dark voice. I don't know whose dark voice it was you believed when it told you that's who you are. I only know that it wasn't the voice of Jesus who slapped that name on you. And Jesus, by the way, wants to erase that name from you. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So let's go to our story of the man in the tombs. And here we're going to get a sneak peek into the kind of behaviors that we will often choose when our lives are being driven by these dark voice names that got slapped on us. And so some of these behaviors, if they don't make sense to you, then it's probably not you, but some of you will immediately recognize yourself in some of these dark voice-driven behaviors. And so in our passage, we saw that the man of the tombs had this complex of behaviors that sounded like this. He was living life homeless, and he was naked, and he was in a cemetery outside the town, and he often rushed out into the wilderness. And so we might recognize these kinds of dark voice-driven behaviors in ourselves in a number of ways. So first of all, in his naked exposure, I keep spitting. You guys might want to put some ponchos on, or if you have an umbrella in your car, you might need it. So first of all, in his naked exposure, the man of the tombs was in a condition of boundaryless vulnerability. Say boundaryless vulnerability. Say it 20 times super fast. All right, that's hard to do. So think about this. If you're living life out in the wilderness and you are completely naked, that's really stupid. All right, it makes for stupid reality TV, but it actually is really stupid in real life, right? But you know what? Listen, in all seriousness, some of us, driven by dark-voiced identities, repeatedly make unwise, boundaryless choices of complete exposure of ourselves in situations that aren't safe and with people that aren't safe, with the result that we just keep getting hurt again and again and again. And so if you find yourself in situations and in relationships where you repeatedly and unwisely expose yourself to being taken advantage of, to being abused, to being manipulated, to being controlled, ask the Lord if there's a dark-voiced name that got slapped on you that's driving that self-destructive choice, those self-destructive choices. Make sense? Another point of connection with the man of the tombs is this. We're told that the man of the tomb walked right up to Jesus as Jesus was climbing out of the boat. Now, remember, walking right up to Jesus, Jesus climbing out of the boat, and the man is buck naked, right? Can't you imagine what the disciples saying? No, nobody look, but there's a naked old creeper on the beach right behind us. Row, get out, right? So listen to this. The dark-voiced identity drove the man of the tombs to live a life of shamelessness. Say shamelessness. So consider this, particularly you young people. Every single day of our lives, we're being bombarded with dark voices that are literally telling us that it's cool to be shameless. That we're more lovable when we shamelessly reduce our fundamental identity to just our private parts. That we're more lovable when we take our God-given capacity for true intimacy and reduce ourselves to shameless, casual hookups. Listen to me, the movies we watch, the songs we're listening to, the user-generated short videos that we're watching on social media, the voices of celebrities, the voices of influencers, they're all pushing us towards shamelessness. But listen, that push is dark-voiced. And this name, shameless or shamelessness, that those dark voices are slapping on us, that name, shamelessness, is no less disturbing than the naked old creeper on the beach. The only difference is we've bought this. We've bought that this is cool. We've bought that this is the way to be. Shamelessness, that's your name. That's who you are. And so ask the Lord if this dark voice name, shamelessness, is being slapped on you. Understood? Okay. So here's another point of connection. In his nakedness, the man of the tombs also lived his life hiding in a cemetery, hiding in fear and hiding in shame, ironically, shameless and shame-filled. Hiding in fear of what people would see if they saw his real naked self, if they saw him for who he really was, and so he had to hide. And I think most of us know this fear that says, oh, if you really got to know the real me, what? You wouldn't like me, let alone love me. And as a result, many of us, I would say most of us, spend our lives hiding from the people around us. Hiding from our spouses, the person that we sleep 6 inches away from in the bed every night. Hiding from our families, hiding from our children, hiding from our best friends, because we're just so ashamed that if they really see who I really am, they won't like it. And so if you find yourself living a life hiding in fear and shame, and or running shamelessly headlong into the shameful, ask the Lord, is there some dark-voiced identity that got slapped on me that's driving those behaviors? Say fear and shame and shamelessness. We said that one. I made you say that one twice. Let's go back through it. Now we have to say all of them twice because I just feel out of balance. Okay. All right, another point of connection with the man of the tomb's behavior, these behaviors of living homeless in a cemetery out in the wilderness is this, that when our lives are driven by dark-voiced names that got slapped on us, it will show up in repeated relational distancing and relational breakdowns in strained and broken family relationships, broken friendships, and in social isolation and consequent feelings of loneliness. And so if you see in yourself this pattern, this repeated pattern of fractured relationships, say fractured relationships. All right, if you see this as a pattern in your life, Ask the Lord, is there a dark-voiced name that got slapped on me that keeps driving me away from people, that keeps driving me away from others? Understood? Okay, all right. I do need some feedback just to make sure I haven't lost you. All right. Another point of connection with the man of the tombs. In his choice to live, again, in a cemetery outside of town, life in a cemetery provided this isolated man with the illusion of being in relationship without the actuality of being in a relationship. Let me say that again because I think you didn't get it. The cemetery provided him with the illusion of being in relationship without the actuality of being in relationship. He was in community in his cemetery with all of his cemetery buddies all the time, but there was no actual exchange of life in his so-called community. Now listen to this illusion of relationship without the actuality of relationship is no more evident than social media. And it sounds like I'm beating up on social media today. I'm not meaning to do that, but in social media, we spend our time in a place where we have dozens and dozens of virtual friends, but no actual friendships. Did you hear that? All right. We're living lives in a cemetery outside of actual community. And it just provides us with the illusion of relationship without the actuality of relationship. And so if you recognize in yourself that like the man of the tombs, you live your life in virtual community instead of actual community, well, ask the Lord, is there something behind that? Is there a dark-voiced name that got slapped on me that is causing me to choose the illusion rather than the actuality? Make sense? Okay. Another point of connection with the fact that the man of the tombs lived in a cemetery is this, that when our lives are driven by dark-voiced identities, we may identify with death then more than life. Despair hangs over us like a low-grade headache. We'll live lives of self-destructive behaviors and entertain suicidal thoughts and fantasies. A dark-voiced identification with death. It pushes away the things of life and embraces the things of the grave. And it says things like this: the world would just be better off without me. Listen, church, I know what it is to live a self-destructive life that was driven by a name that got slapped on me. And that name was disposable. That's who I am. I'm disposable. And I lived for years a disposable life. I know what that is. And I also know what it is to be set free by the voice of Jesus. And so if you recognize in yourself these sorts of death-choosing behaviors, this sort of despair, these thought patterns of, suicidal, self-destructive fantasy, then ask the Lord, what name got slapped on me that's driving this identification with death? Got it? Okay. Next in verse 28, they were told that the man of the tombs shrieked and he screamed when Jesus showed up. Dark voices will tell you you don't belong around Jesus, let alone belong to Jesus. Dark voices will tell you you're a disappointment to God, and you will never, ever, ever find the right button to push to make him happy about you. All right? Dark voices will tell you that you have gotten on God's last nerve. He can't stand you, and he's out to get you. So if you find that you get uncomfortable or restless or agitated around Jesus and around Jesus' people and around Jesus' talk, ask the Lord, is there a dark voice A dark voice name that got slapped on me that's driving me away from Jesus, that's driving my spiritual discomfort. We didn't say spiritual discomfort, did we? Let's say that. Spiritual discomfort. Spiritual discomfort. All right. Moving on. In verse 29, we're told that the dark voices often took control of the man of the tombs. And so, quite simply here, if you find that your life is out of control, your life is out of control, that you can't say no when you know you need to say no, right? And you're not often even sure why you keep doing the things that you keep doing. Right? Ask the Lord, is there a dark voice name that got slapped on me that is driving me out of control? Let's say out of control. Is that making sense? Yeah, okay, all right. Continue on. I've only got like 150 of these. All right. Do we have time? Yeah, okay, all right. Next, in verse 29, we're also told that the man of the tombs was placed under guard and put in chains and shackles, or when that happened, he just simply broke them and he ran away. And so what we see here, and listen to this carefully, is that a dark voice-driven life, it's resistant to help. It runs away from the care and concern of others. It breaks off protective restraint. Oh, no. Don't stop me from doing stupid. A dark voice-driven life confuses freedom from restraint with just actually being free. And so if any of these behaviors fit, ask the Lord, is there a dark voice name that got slapped on me that just keeps driving me, driving my resistance to help and restraint? I don't think we said that one. Let's read that last line together. Resistance to help and restraint. Next, in verse 29, we see that there literally was dark-voiced power. Literally dark voice power that was at work in this man's extraordinary ability to break iron shackles. That's extraordinary, right? And I suspect it's unlikely that any of us can relate to that. I don't know. Anybody want to raise your hand and say, oh, yeah, I do that all the time? All right. One person. All right. So probably most of us actually don't know what that sort of dark-voiced power is like when it's at work in our lives. But I do know this, that we can probably all relate to that behavior, or many of us. I know from my own personal experience, and I know from pastoral experience, that many of us are driven to accomplish extraordinary feats. And doing that because of dark-voiced identities. All right, let me explain in case that doesn't make sense. Let's just say that deep down inside, you have a voice telling you that you are good for nothing and you are never going to amount to anything. You're a worthless good for nothing who's never going to amount to anything. Well, in response to that, there are many of us who live our lives in slavish subjection to proving that voice wrong, right? And we become performers or textbook overachievers or compulsive perfectionists, driven to have to be the best student, to have to be the best athlete, to have to be the number one this, the number one that, driven to be the most successful whatever. All right? Now listen to this. I'm not saying that accomplishment per se is bad. I'm just saying that some of us may find that our unrelenting, obsessive drive to be extraordinary might actually be fueled by the need to prove to some voice that we're not the hideous name that they slapped on us. And so if you find that you live a driven, performance-oriented, perfectionistic life, ask the Lord, is there a dark voice name that got slapped on me that's driving my obsessions? Let's read those bottom two lines. So, perfectionistic performance, compulsive behaviors. And lastly, last one. Verse 27, we're told that the man of the tombs had been living out his dark-voiced identity for a long time. Right? The man was stuck, and he had been stuck for a long time in the kinds of destructive behaviors that we've been talking about this morning. Have you ever found yourself saying, my life just feels like a broken record? All right, for you younger people, you're going to have to goggle what a broken record is. What? I don't even know. It'll be on the interweb. So if my life just feels like it's just lather, rinse, repeat, lather, rinse, repeat, lather, rinse, repeat. Or if you found yourself saying, there's no point in even trying anymore because I'm just going to fall back to where I am right now. So why even try? And so if you have self-destructive behaviors that you've been stuck in for a long time, ask the Lord if there's a dark voice name that got slapped on you that's keeping you stuck. All right, very quickly. I want to look at what changes in us when Jesus tells us the truth about who we really are. And he sets us free from these dark voice lies, these dark voice names that get slapped on us. And so in verses 31 through 34, I'm going to skip those passages, but Jesus, quite powerfully extraordinary, it's fun to read, you'll have to read those verses, expulses these dark voices from the man's life. And then here's what we read when we pick up afterward in verse 35. So let's read this together. People rushed out to see what had happened, and a crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been freed from the demons, and he was sitting at Jesus' feet. Pause there. Say, sitting at Jesus' feet. Fully clothed, your turn. Fully clothed. And perfectly sane. You get to say it. And they were all afraid. Just a quick, they were all afraid. Sometimes when Jesus does powerful stuff in our lives, the people around us don't get it. And they actually become the biggest resistance to transformation in our lives. That's a freebie. You can just tuck that away. All right, next screen. Let's read this together. And the man who had been freed from the demons begged to go with Jesus. But Jesus sent him home saying, no, go back to your family and tell them everything God has done for you. So he went through all the town proclaiming the great things Jesus had done for him. We could easily spend another week just in these verses unpacking all the implication of what it looks like when Jesus frees us from these dark voice names that get slapped on us. But here's just a very quick summary. So we find ourselves sitting at Jesus' feet. We find ourselves sitting at Jesus' feet, at peace with God, comfortable in Jesus' presence, not shrieking, not screaming, not running away, but comfortable in Jesus' presence, knowing that we're loved, we're accepted, and that we belong to and that we belong with Jesus. Peace with God. Let's say that. Peace with God. Second thing we find when Jesus erased dark names over us, we find ourselves in our right minds. All right, holy us, thinking true thoughts about, I jumped ahead. Cleansed from shame and freed from shamelessness. All right, fully clothed. The man was fully clothed at Jesus' feet. So let's say that together. Cleansed from shame and freed from shamelessness. Third point now. When Jesus sets us free from dark voice names, we find ourselves in our right minds. We're wholly us. We're thinking true thoughts about God. We're thinking true thoughts about ourselves. We're choosing sane and sober and healthy behaviors. We're unstuck and in control. In control in the sense that we're living in dependence upon the power of God and finding power to make healthy choices. We're living in the fullness of our identity of who we are in Christ, fully and wholly, WHOLLY, who we were created to be. So now we will say, holy me. You guys say that. That's what Jesus does when he sets us free. And then lastly, we find ourselves restored to healthy relationships. Did you get that last slide of verses? Jesus said, no, it'd be awesome if you came with me, but go back to who? Your family, right? Remember, he was isolated. He was living in the cemetery. He was living in the wilderness, and Jesus healed his relationships. Go back to your family. And what did he do? He did that and to the whole town. He went to the whole town. And so we see him restored in community. Relational healing is what happens when Jesus erases dark names over us. And so the power of Jesus heals us, and it sets us free from all of these destructive behaviors that dark-voiced names drive us to do. Amen.